Let's start. Good evening. Welcome to a webinar, the martial law. And as you know, this is a very difficult time. And on such a short notice, I'm so glad that we're able to have this organize this webinar. And the title of the webinar today is Despotism, Desperation, and the Yoon Regime's Failed Coup. Let me begin a brief introduction, and then I will introduce our speakers and follow the discussion. On December 3rd, 2024, amid 250 days of US-led annual war games and long massive citizen protest demanding his resignation, South Korea's far-right President 윤석열 put his nation under martial law the first time since 1979. Thanks to the heroic resistance put up by opposition National Assembly members and the Korean citizens, the edict was withdrawn in a matter of hours and in the absence of bloodshed. Nonetheless, Yoon remains a threat to Korean democracy. The motivation for this failed coup lies in the ongoing crisis of legitimacy facing Yoon's puppet government, which has eagerly acquiesced to every demand made by its American and Japanese partners, while making a hollow mockery of a Korean self-determination and ignoring the interests of the nation he swore to defend. Since assuming power, Yoon has actively worked to undermine the very basis of Korean independence and democracy back to its roots during the brutal period of Japanese colonization in World War II. Join us to support Koreans in their demand for an end to Yoon's legacy of betrayal and his assault on democracy itself. South Korea's president 윤석열 must resign immediately or to be impeached. This is according to the report from The Economist, December 5th, 2024. So today we have two speakers, and KJ No, who is a member of Veterans for Peace and Pivot to Peace, and who is a co-host of the China Report. And KJ is a political analyst and educator and journalist focusing on geopolitics and the political economy of the Asia and Pacific. And we'll also have Ju Hyun. We originally invited Tim Shurak, a journalist, former reporter for The Nation, and he has been covering Korea's democracy and especially the Gwangju uprising and the martial law declaration during at the time. However, unfortunately, Tim has a personal family emergency, so unfortunately he cannot join us today. So we have Julian Park, who is a member of the Nodokdo, a US-based anti-imperialist Korean diaspora organization, and he's also the editor at the Real News. So we'll have these speakers and addressing not only the current crisis, but also the geopolitical and also historical and also activism that based in the United States and also reaching out to Korea. Before we start, I would like to start with solidarity statement prepared by Paul Lim, who is the chair of the board members. And this is going to be a very brief statement, an inspiring statement, and which encourage us to fight against this, obviously, the great assault on democracy. So without further ado, let's go to Paul. Let me stop sharing my screen. Before we go to Paul, let me just stop sharing. Okay, Paul Lim.
Okay, thank you, Simone, and all the speakers online. This statement was delivered at a rally in San Francisco on Wednesday evening that was organized by Nodokdo. It was one of 3 rallies organized around the country, the others in Los Angeles and New York. And so this was the statement we read at the rally. The Korea Policy Institute stands in solidarity with the struggle of the South Korean people to oust the dictator Yoon from power and to make way for a leadership that will represent their true interests, to place prosperity for the common good over profits for the few, to demand sincere apology and just compensation from Japan for its crimes against the Korean people during World War II, to establish a lasting peace on the Korean Peninsula between the Republic of Korea and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, and a framework within which separated families can be reunited. For his crime of insurrection, Yoon and those who plotted with him should be punished swiftly, but we must prepare for protracted struggle. Yoon has shown no remorse for his actions, nor any sign that he will resign voluntarily. Impeachment can only succeed with a National Assembly vote of 2/3 in favor. For this to happen, at least 8 members of Yoon's People Power Party will have to defect. We hope they will, but we cannot count on it. Until now and the day when Korea will be free from the scourge of Yoon and the self-entitled First Lady Kim Kyun-hee, we in the US must work tirelessly to support the Korean people's struggle against fascism until victory, even as we struggle against fascism here. This is a dangerous time for Korea, but not because of any threat posed by the DPRK, and not because of the developing alliance between the DPRK and Russia. It is dangerous because the neoliberal social order upon which US global hegemony rests is in political and economic crisis everywhere. In South Korea, Japan, Europe, Middle East, and even in the United States. As a result, the United States is going to desperate lengths to preserve its global hegemony at the cost of war in Ukraine, genocide in Palestine, war against Iran, regime change in Argentina, and threatening war against China and the DPRK, to name a few. Yoon must go not only because he is in essence a dictator in the same vein as Chun Doo-hwan, Park Geun-hye, Park Chung-hee, and Syngman Rhee, but because, like them, he willingly places the interests of the United States ahead of the interests of the Korean people. And as a consequence, Korea has been a divided country since liberation from Japan in 1945, in a state of war for the past 70 years, and is today the linchpin in a US-Japan ROK trilateral military alliance preparing to go to war with China and the DPRK, both nuclear-armed countries. The peace-loving people of the Republic of Korea have no such interest in war with China and or threatening the DPRK with regime change. For these reasons and for his crime of insurrection against the democratic institutions of the Republic of Korea, the dictator Yoon must go.
Thank you so much, Paul, for such a powerful and inspiring statement. And indeed, this is just right now today, the Parliament will vote on impeachment. And unfortunately, the news that I have hearing so far is that there's not enough vote, specifically because of the opposition of the ruling PPT. And we need about 8 votes from the ruling party, but it looks like so far they have not fully committed. So this is truly historic day, what we are doing today. And Paul's words are such a powerful, and I think it will resonate in to Korea, or to all those people in Korea who are right now fighting against Yoon's dictatorship. Okay, so without further ado, let's go to let's have KJ now. As I already introduced KJ, he has been tireless advocate, educator, analyst, and is a brilliant scholar. And so KJ is gonna I hope that KJ can address more broader issue, the role of United States geopolitics, and also is Korea's location position in this in new war against China. How does that all related to the Yoon's rise of a dictatorship and the crisis that we are facing right now? Okay, KJ.
So I'm very happy to be with you, everybody. This is a momentous and historic time. I just want to unpack a little bit of the background and the context whereby this happened. And I thought I'd start out by showing you this picture. This is Kim Moo-sung. He's a South Korean member of parliament. And if you see, then if you look at the next picture, you'll see that he's actually carrying Curtis J. Scaparotti on his back. This is, I think, emblematic of the Korea-US relationship. And it's also emblematic of the relationship between Yoon and Joe Biden. I want to point out that before Yoon was elected, he was given a prime spread in Foreign Affairs magazine. And those of you who follow foreign affairs know that Foreign Affairs is the official journal of the Council of Foreign Relations. It's how the deep state speaks to itself. And Yoon was given this complete, large primary spread on the most influential journal on the planet. And one of the things that he said there was that how South Korea had benefited from the United States and that Seoul should seek a comprehensive strategic alliance with Washington and that it should follow Washington's Indo-Pacific strategy and join the Quad and create a trilateral security coordination with the United States. Essentially, this is the rite or ritual of obeisance that got him elected, in my opinion. Just to go into some more of the specifics here. So he said, among other things, that Korea should no longer be confined to the Korean peninsula, but rise to the challenge of a global pivot state that advances freedom, peace, and democracy through liberal democratic values and substantial cooperation. Once again, let me emphasize that freedom, peace, and prosperity through liberal democratic values. And then he pointed out Washington was the central axis of Seoul's foreign policy, that there should be important bilateral collaboration, including all kinds of issues, including supply chains. And then he criticized Moon Jae-in. He pointed out that Moon, when he refused THAAD, he was actually undermining Korea's sovereignty. And then he pledged to have extended deterrence and to restart war games and demand CVID of North Korea. And then he endorsed the free and open, inclusive Indo-Pacific. He talked about joining the Quad, and he talked about taking part in trilateral security coordination with the United States and Japan. This is essentially what became JACUS. He said the two countries should normalize, etc., and set up high-level comprehensive talks on cooperation. Essentially, what Yoon did was he offered Biden's foreign policy back to him on a silver platter. And essentially, he subjugated South Korean foreign policy towards the US. And then he did this in multiple times. This was with another meeting, etc. Linchpin for peace and prosperity, affirming the US-ROC Mutual Defense Treaty, increasing the scope and scale of exercises, explicit and coded participation of South Korea in war against China, in all war-fighting domains, and in all potential conflict areas, in particular with the potential use of tactical nuclear weapons. These were all promises that Yoon made to Biden before and after he was elected. So essentially, the US is escalating to war with China on all fronts. And Korea was very, very important, is very, very important. But all of that was framed as South Korea is this leading democracy. And when this coup happened, everybody is saying, oh my goodness, you know, South Korea's democracy worked, you know, martial law was rescinded. But as we know, very few Koreans are feeling safe that democracy worked. The most terrifying phrase in the South Korean lexicon is emergency martial law decree, 비상계엄령. This is probably the most frightening word in the Korean language because we associate it with torture, disappearances, beatings, shallow graves, mass graves, just unbridled terror. And because we are not safe, or we're not sure that this is over currently as we speak, legislators are sleeping inside the parliament so they don't have to scramble at night and surmount barricades to get back into the building. And of course, protesters are standing in vigil. So, you know, the West likes to talk about South Korea as one of the strongest, most dynamic democracies in the world, a champion of democracy for the world. This is Anthony Blinken. But we know that Yoon's martial law sought to extirpate and annihilate all democratic opposition. He referred to them as pro-North, anti-state forces. And it's really only through a series of lucky coincidences and missteps that it was thwarted. And we know the crisis is not over yet. Now, the US has been talking about South Korea as the leader of a global pivot state that is fighting autocracies and championing the importance of liberal democracy around the world. You may remember that Yoon was invited to address a joint session of Congress, and he received repeated standing ovations. And he unironically warned that totalitarian forces may conceal and disguise themselves as defenders of democracy and human rights. The gall, the brazenness of this language. And of course, he bloviated about the rule of law. But this shows you how fraudulent this language around democracy is and how fraudulent the Biden's alliance of democracies is. We can also note the mendacity and the hypocrisy of the West. When this coup was happening and Korean citizens were throwing their bodies against martial law troops, and it was clearly a military coup. If you look at the statements of Western governments, of NATO, of embassies, not one of them denounced the coup. Not one of them denounced it as an egregious attack on democracy, on the body politic. The only thing they said, and this was following what the US said, was, we are watching developments closely, followed by the statement, Korea is our closest ally, which is code for we support Yoon. And Taiwan province even came out and they praised martial law. They said in an official tweet, South Korean legislature has been controlled by pro-North Korean forces. They're recycling the complete BS. And to protect constitutional freedom, South Korean President Yoon has initiated nationwide martial law. And then they claim that the same thing is happening to us. And they say, we are Team Taiwan, we're defending infiltration of worldwide dark and evil forces into this country, intimating that they think this is a good idea, and they could also do that. So much for Taiwan as a model democracy. So much for South Korea as a model democracy. I just want to point out, this is stuff you already know, and what Paul has said, but this is clearly insurrection. First thing is, you do not get to declare martial law without justification. Martial law under the Korean Constitution is reserved for war, for wartime, or for catastrophic national emergencies. There's no such thing as a national emergency here. He was having policy friction. He was having policy deadlock in the National Assembly. And of course, he was in danger of being impeached. But that doesn't give you the right to deploy military forces just because you're frustrated. Remember, it's just recently come out that he directed the intelligence services to arrest Lee Jae-myung, Woo Won-sik, Han Dong-un, and Cho Guk, the top leaders of the opposition and the head of his own party. He directed them to be arrested and taken away into detention in Gwacheon. He also sent troops to occupy the National Election Committee offices. And these armed troops, they took with them an ambulance, and most sinister, they brought with them an empty truck. And the speculation is that they were expecting to shoot hundreds of people and pile them into the truck and cart them away. And of course, we know that he was trying to obstruct the constitutional process. That is to say, the South Korean constitution provides that legislators can rescind martial law as part of checks and balances. And his first action was to send troops to prevent legislators from getting into the National Assembly. And the martial law decree said all political activity, including the actions of the National Assembly, are to be immediately banned. So this is clearly insurrection. What kept this from turning into a complete debacle, according to some military specialists, is that the 707 Special Warfare Forces Brigade, they had been told after the address at 10:30 to take the National Assembly building by 11 p.m. at any cost. What happened was that there was 48-minute delay because the helicopters that they were taking did not receive air transit clearance. And the reason for that is, of course, South Korean airspace, especially the capital, is very tightly monitored. It's defended with radar and anti-aircraft batteries. It's very, very densely defended. But in particular, because Yoon had moved his residence to Yongsan, that also was especially monitored. So all of this kind of blew back on Yoon, perhaps, but it resulted in a delay that resulted in troops landing at 11:48, 48 minutes later than they were expected to do. And because of this, 190 legislators were able to drive, run, walk, jump, and beat the special forces to the building, where they entered and they barricaded themselves and they voted and they rescinded the decree by 1:02 a.m. And if you look at some of the footage there, it really looks like something out of a movie, like a zombie movie, The Train to Busan, where people see the zombies coming and they're trying to blockade the doors before they are attacked. What we have to understand here is 윤석열 is a monster who was made in Washington. Tim Sherrock calls him Washington's man. This is absolutely true. Everybody knew that he was an autocrat in waiting. From his campaign, he said that he would create a republic of prosecutors. And then once he was elected, he tried to destroy Lee Jae-myung by raiding his personal residence hundreds of times. I think 400 times. If you can imagine your house being raided once, it's traumatic. Lee Jae-myung had his house raided 400 times. And apparently it's just come out recently that Yoon would discuss declaring martial law as if he were ordering a pizza. He says, should we have martial law today? Should we have pizza today? This was his mindset. So the question we have to ask is, how did Yoon become touted as this paragon of democratic virtue? And how did he become so despotically out of touch? As I said, Yoon is very, very important for US geostrategic agenda. Before he was elected, he put forth his confession of the doctrine of the faith in Foreign Affairs magazine. And because of that, he was lionized by the United States at every turn. He was pumped up as the global leader of liberal democracy, the leader of the global pivot state that advances freedom, peace, prosperity. He was constantly receiving stroking, even as he was persecuting, prosecuting, smashing every democratic institution in Korea in sight. He was going after the media, he's smashing the independent press, he was threatening unions, opposition parties, peace groups, social service groups. Nobody was spared under Yoon. When the unions went on strike, they were charged, as he just did with the National Assembly, as anti-state, pro-North seditionists, and they were threatened with prison and fines. KAIST, the Korean Advanced Institute of Scientific Research, they were protesting budget cuts, and Yoon's thugs came in and they smashed their faces in and dragged them out like, sacks of garbage. They were constantly raiding media institutions and union offices and opposition party politicians. And even as he was doing this, grinding Korean citizens and Korean institutions under his boot heel, he was endlessly praised by the United States. For them, he was Mr. American Pie. Remember, 1 week before the declaration of martial law, 100,000 hit the streets to demand his resignation. And the US media, Western press, AFP, AP, Reuters, New York Times, Guardian, all of them did a total media blackout. 100,000 on the streets in midwinter and not one column inch. So this is clear. Yoon is a bastard, but he was the American bastard. Because of that, you never criticized him. He was incapable of any wrong. He was always to be protected and valorized. And therefore, they created a Caligula, the Caligula of Yongsan. And he simply went from praise to stroke to praise and got the sense that he could get away with anything. This is Cho Tae at the Summit of Democracies, the foreign minister, and he talks, President Yoon stated, human history shows political freedom reigned supreme, prosperity flourished. Korea's journey is a living testament to this truth. We embrace the ideals of freedom, human rights, and rule of law. We aspire to become a global pivot state in solidarity with international community to safeguard and advance these values. And then Anthony Blinken says, a single generation, the strongest, most dynamic democracy in the world, a champion of democracy for the world. He's addressing 윤석열 here. And then he talks about Seoul will take up the mantle. Mr. Yoon, your principled leadership has helped bring us even closer and has made Korea a global pivot state. So it's not surprising that he decided that he could do anything he wanted and get away with it. There were no restrictions on him because his puppet masters were telling him. He could do anything. He could do no wrong. He was the paragon of virtue and democracy. But there's another little question we have to ask is, did the US know this coup was happening? And if they did, when did they know about it? Now, the Pentagon says that no comment. They won't say if they were notified in advance, but I would say it's impossible for them not to have known, because all previous military coups in South Korea have been green-lighted by the United States. And this is because the US has control over all troops in South Korea. The Korean military reports to the UNC CFC command, which is led by a US general. And the US maintains wartime OPCON, which means that it maintains OPCON. The other thing is, if you've ever been in the military, and especially if you've served in the military in Korea, is that all troop movements have to be reported and coordinated with the United States, because you need to avoid a friendly fire incident, because the entire peninsula is packed with troops, arms, surveillance, weapons, all on hair trigger alert. And they're so tightly up against each other that if any single troop moves, or if there's any single martial movement, alarms go up all through the network, and everybody is pointing their guns at each other. So you really have to notify if you want to move troops anywhere from point A to point B. The other thing to understand is that South Korean special forces, the ones who are at the National Assembly, they are the most tightly integrated into the US military. In fact, they are part of the US military. They literally merge into a single entity. The Special Warfare Forces, this is the US Special Operations Command. They say South Korea's Special Forces are the most tightly integrated with the US of any military. The only Special Operations Command in the world where the US and host nations' Special Warfare Forces merge into a single unit. So this is the jargon. We are institutionally organized for combined operation. And SOCOR, that's the US Special Operations, and ROK Special Warfare Command will combine to establish the Combined Special Operations Component Command Control under the US, under a US general. And of course, the last piece of this, South Korea is the most densely surveilled place in the planet, in particular, the airspace. So the helicopters moving the troops from the National Assembly were delayed because that transit area is so tightly monitored and restricted. But we also have to understand that that monitoring and air surveillance is probably directly reported to the US command, because all of that information, all of that surveillance is networked. If it weren't, it wouldn't make any sense. So we can clearly assert that there is US complicity and knowledge somewhere along this chain. So to summarize, it's only by luck and pluck that we averted a political catastrophe. And it's not simply that this is a political catastrophe, it is a legitimacy crisis for not only for Korea, but it is actually a legitimation crisis for the US empire, which is having crises all among its vassals right now. In Europe, in Asia, all over the world, there are these legitimation crises. So the US has designated South Korea as, the leader, partner, global fight against autocracies. Kurt Campbell nominated 윤석열 for a Nobel Prize. But Yoon has simply shown himself up to be a crackpot US client despot, like generations of dictators before him, Chun Doo-hwan, Roh Tae-woo, Park Chung-hee, Lee Seung-man, all of them crackpot, client, tin pot dictators. Yoon was in favor only because he was an executor of US geostrategic plans. That is, he was preparing for war against China. And without US support, he would not have even held the office of the president. He would not have become president. He received dramatic support from the US ruling elite. He was a walking fulfillment list. And when he was elected, champagne corks blew up in Washington. And now that he's reverting to his full barbarian authoritarian mode, the mask has fallen off the imperial clown show. So this is my argument. I will say that this is what's really going on here. It's not simply that Yoon was an autocrat and the Koreans beat him back and now we're in this gray zone. The real story is that as the US empire weakens, the power, its force field of mystification wanes. It's no longer able to mystify and create spin illusions as it has traditionally. The things break apart, they fall apart, the illusion falls apart. And so Yoon's fall from grace is not a symptom of Korea's robust democracy or a sign that Korea is stable and resilient. It's an unmasking of Yoon as an incompetent despot of the US empire. And it also unmasks the fraudulence of the empire managers who sold him to the world as a paragon of political virtue. That is the real legitimation crisis here. So anyway, the trance has been broken momentarily. And as we break the trance, we become more awake and more capable of taking real action. So courageous Koreans smashed that trance momentarily. The question is, will others around the world join them?
Thank you so much, KJ. This was brilliant and also informative analysis. And those of you who are, I would like to also note that KJ just published a latest op-ed piece on Counterpunch. Its title is South Korea's Martial Law Fiasco, Legitimation Crisis in the Imperial Vassal State. So just published today. And I hope that you have a chance to read it. It's a brilliant op-ed. As KJ pointed out, I think that those parts that KJ pointed out that a lot of us, we may not have a good understanding specifically how the South Korea's military is controlled, also directly connected to the United States, and also which leads to our question about the U.S. role and in contrast, such a mute response from Biden administration and Washington about this illegal coup. And I also want to point out one more thing. This was to some extent it was a matter of luck, as you recall. Within 2.5 hours, about 150 lawmakers were able to convene and introduced a resolution, introduced a law that rescinded the martial law. And then within 2.5 hours, we were 190 lawmakers voted. And so what that means, and meanwhile, Lee Jae-myung, the chair of opposition party, he made a call immediately, and he reached out to just come to the National Assembly, and then he immediately, about 10,000 Koreans, in a matter of 2 hours, they basically surrounded the National Assembly. And of course, there are many more stories of heroic stories at that. So in other words, this was really true in a way. Without those heroic resistance, we may still be right now under martial law. So with that note, let's go to Park Joo-hyun. And then I point out that he's a member of this amazing Korean American US-based anti-imperialist diaspora organization, and they have just launched a US Out of Korea campaign this year. And as I hope that he could also address what's happening right now with the movement and the amazing campaign that they are launching there. Okay, Ju-hyun.
Thank you, Chun Kosunim. Everyone else, thank you all for being here. I think it is quite early in Korea right now. And I imagine for those of you in the US, it is also the end of a long day. So really appreciate everyone taking the time. We are certainly coming together at a very contentious moment in Korea's history. It's very, very uncertain what is going to happen next in the next few hours. But I think it's incredibly important for us to take time to ground ourselves in the reality of the situation that we're facing. Not only, given all the dynamics that KJ has described so eloquently, but also the uncertainty of the future. But we can definitely look to our past as a guide to help understand what may be coming next, and of course, most importantly, how we need to be fighting back at this time. Before I begin, I will say a little bit about the organization I'm representing here today, Norutol. The full name is Norutol for Korean Community Development. For those of you who are not Korean speakers, Norutol means stepping stones. It is a reference to a very old song. And the organization was founded in 1999 here in New York City. For the last 25 years, we have been engaged in supporting the struggle for Korea's national liberation, and that's manifested in various forms of activity. For a very long time, Norutol organized delegation trips for members of the Korean diaspora to both South and North Korea. The trips to North Korea have been paused indefinitely because of the travel ban that was unilaterally imposed by the United States, preventing US passport holders from visiting the DPRK in 2017. However, we have continued with our delegation trips to South Korea, and I'll be referencing some of those experiences as we speak together here today. In addition to this historical work of delegations, we have also supported and uplifted various people's struggles that have unfolded in South Korea over the years. Examples of this include the anti-base struggles in Pyeongtaek and in Soseongri against THAAD, as well as lifting up the demands of the families of the Sewol tragedy and supporting mobilizations that were occurring here in the United States during that time. Most recently, we launched the US Out of Korea campaign, which you can learn about by visiting usoutofkorea.org. I'll be sure to share that in the chat here with you now. The reason that we came to the decision to launch this campaign was a result of the various conjuncture of changing conditions on the peninsula. On the one hand, we noted under the Biden administration a drastic escalation in US military exercises and other forms of military threats and aggression against the DPRK, which were threatening to bring us to the brink of war, which we believe we have just about reached in Korea today. To give an example of the kinds of change in environment that we have seen in Korea in recent years, in 2023, there were more than 200 days of military exercises in Korea. That's more than half the days of the year in which the US military was engaged in war games that were, among other things, designed to rehearse the invasion of the DPRK. And of course, as many of you may know, in August, we also saw Iron Mace 24, which was the first joint tabletop nuclear exercise between the US and South Korea, essentially laying plans for an eventual nuclear strike on the peninsula in the event of war. Now, this is not something that is unfamiliar to us as Korean people. During the Korean War itself, there were a number of threats made by various US presidents, various commanders of the UN command to use nuclear weapons in Korea. This included threats from General MacArthur to turn the border between China and North Korea into a cordon sanitaire by not only using nuclear bombs, but also sowing the land with radioactive cobalt so that nothing there could grow and that the people would be forced to leave the area. There were also a number of moments in which the Joint Chiefs of Staffs of the United States greenlit the use of nuclear weapons in Korea, and throughout the war, the DPRK military noted a number of occasions in which the warplanes of the US Air Force made maneuvers that were exactly identical to the maneuvers that were made over Hiroshima and Nagasaki just a few years before. So the threat of the nuclear crisis in Korea has long been there. But of course, the origin of the crisis is actually from the United States, and it is the US that introduced nuclear weapons to Korea for the first time from 1958 until the 1990s. And the situation we saw unfolding in Korea during the Biden years, and of course under the Yoon years as well, was a drastic escalation and a very rapid return to this very threatening situation that could easily end in nuclear annihilation and really turning the peninsula into an unlivable place. Korea, at the end of the day, is not a very large country in terms of land mass. It is a very populous country with tens of millions of people across the peninsula. And these are all the people whose lives would be torn apart, uprooted, destroyed by the introduction of nuclear weapons into the peninsula. If Washington succeeded in triggering a war with North Korea as part of its path to launching an eventual war on China and challenging China for hegemony in the Asia Pacific. Now, to get back to this particular moment of the attempted martial law, really an attempted coup, I think is what we should call it. And the impending impeachment vote. Immediately when, for us, we woke up in the morning and we saw the news, since we are a little bit ahead in terms of time, or behind in terms of time rather. And immediately what came to mind was just how much the United States has backed Yoon as a figure in all the ways that KJ has already described. So far, the narrative has really focused on Yoon as a singular actor. In our view, this is not correct. It's the United States that propped him up before the world, introduced him as a paragon of democracy. He was hosted in the White House. There were all these occasions in which he was praised as a world leader, particularly for the trilateral alliance that he formed with Japan. And I think that, this is really central to understanding why this coup even occurred, because the situation internally in South Korea always indicated that there was a huge political crisis unfolding from the beginning. We have to remember that Yoon was elected by the narrowest margin in Korean history, under 1% of the vote. And from the beginning, many of the positions he took were extremely controversial, extremely contested by a vast majority of the population, not just in terms of his naked aggression against the DPRK, but in addition to that, many of the policies he was pursuing internally, from his desire to abolish the Ministry of Gender Equality, which is at the end of the day just a government institution that helps single mothers. There's really no reason to want to get rid of that unless you have the most barbaric and chauvinistic outlook on gender relations possible. And then, of course, there was his attacks on trade unions in the KCTU. And, I had the pleasure, along with some other members of Norutol, to be in South Korea last year and actually had the occasion to meet with organizers with the Korean Metalworkers Union. And what they described to us in terms of the repression they were facing was absolutely horrific. They had more than 1,000 members of their union that had come under trial, or not trial, but rather investigation by the prosecutor's office on charges ranging from racketeering to potentially being North Korean agents, which is also a threat that we saw Yoon wield against the trucker strike, which occurred last year. And I think that's something we need to really understand in terms of the Yoon administration's domestic policy, is how connected it was to his role within the US empire as well. Yoon as a leader of South Korea, his legacy is really helping to build a new architecture of war that is dominated by the United States, and which many critics refer to as Asian NATO. And a really central plank of that process is the JACUS Trilateral Alliance with Tokyo. Now, this is a real indication that Yoon Suk-yeol clearly aligned South Korea with the United States in the new Cold War, which was not necessarily the case in the previous administration, but he really pushed this to a new point. And in doing so, he also hitched South Korea to Washington's economic policies of the new Cold War, because the United States has entered a bit of a conundrum, because for the last half century or so, it has allowed for the export of industry from the United States to East Asia in particular to take advantage of cheap Asian labor, beginning in many respects with South Korea and then eventually spreading to China, to the ASEAN states. And this has really created a new political economy of imperialism at the world level, where the commodities that are produced with cheap Asian labor are then, owned by US-based corporations, US finance capital. They're created with technology that is held under US patents. And then this is the way that the US maintains its economic hold over the world economy. But in doing so, the US has also made it impossible to now, or not impossible necessarily, but has created a lot of barriers in its own political and military agenda against China, which is, of course, a rising power. And because if the United States is going to pursue war with China, how is it going to do that when components for its warships, its warplanes, for vast amounts of its weaponry in its military arsenal are also being produced in China? And so in order to get around that, the United States has pursued what has been referred to under the Biden administration as the new Washington Consensus, which has sought to really sever the production links between the US and China in particular. And that is where South Korea comes in as an extremely pivotal state in that strategy. Now, the result for this has been that South Korean corporations have had to cut many of their investments and many of their ties with China. And the consequences for South Korea's workers has been a total upheaval of the economy. We've seen in the last couple of years, South Korea essentially enter recession, something which is not really recognized, of course, by the global corporate media or by Yoon himself in many respects. And what that's meant for the vast majority of people is economic upheaval, layoffs. It has meant austerity. It has meant on top of that, dealing with the inflation coming from the COVID-19 crisis and the Ukraine war. So we've seen a really punishing economic reality in South Korea unfold under Yoon, and we tie that directly to the new Cold War, and we understand his assault on trade unions in that context. And I think, this is all very crucial to understanding how the coup started and also in many respects how it was defeated, right? Because Yoon made this maneuver towards a coup essentially because he could no longer govern. I mean, you look at these approval ratings throughout his presidency, it's a miracle that he even lasted this long. And then, of course, this coup was a very desperate attempt to cling onto power, to cling onto Washington's agenda in the Korean Peninsula. But then it also explains how masses of people were inspired to mobilize so quickly and swiftly in order to defeat this coup. And all of this, of course, has been withheld from the world by the US media, by the US government's treatment of Yoon, as KJ No already explained for us today. Now, to get a little bit into the response that we have had as Norutol to the situation unfolding on the ground. Immediately, we saw the need to uphold the KCTU's demands for Yoon's resignation, and not just ending at that, but a total transformation of society, because there is a much deeper underlying problem, a much deeper rot in the political system in South Korea, which has to be addressed, and of course comes back to the system of capitalism and the domination of this ruling class that is backed by the United States. In solidarity with all our people in South Korea and recognizing that the crisis was not over, we held a series of emergency mobilizations in Los Angeles, San Francisco, and in New York City, where I'm speaking to you from now, just to share some of the images that have come out from this. And also to, give folks an opportunity to note that, it was not only Korean people that were mobilizing for this. We were joined by national liberation organizations representing a variety of diasporas and oppressed nationalities here in the US. We were joined by socialist organizations, progressive groups, peace organizations. And we had about 500 people participating in 3 different cities during this week, and we are ready to mobilize once again if there are any problems with the impeachment vote, if we believe that there are credible reports of a second coup attempt unfolding, which is certainly a risk that we see as very real. To share a little bit more of some of the other aspects of our response, we have also organized 60 different, primarily US-based, but some Korean-based organizations as well, to endorse a statement, not only calling for Yoon's resignation, but ultimately connecting this crisis with the US's support for Yoon, which we made sure to connect to the US's general pattern of its relationship with South Korea, which has been to support brutal military dictators, regardless of the crimes they commit against the Korean people. The status quo as it is, and as it has always been between the US and South Korea, is that South Korean leaders have carte blanche, a free hand, to commit massacres, atrocities, and harm as many Korean people as they want to, as long as South Korea remains a military base for US interests and an open market for US corporations. So this is what we want to highlight in this moment in order to really push the understanding that this is an international struggle. It does implicate the United States, and we do need people in the United States to be speaking up in this time against further US attempts to back coup measures or any kind of authoritarian backsliding in South Korea. Now, in addition to all of that, I think something we really have to keep in mind as well is how deeply implicated the US has been in these past massacres. When we see this moment, we think of the Jeju massacre, we think of the Yosu Suncheon massacre, we think of the Podolik massacre during the Korean War, Gwangju, and the role that the US had in not only providing support for those regimes, but really playing an active role on the ground in terms of coordinating, in terms of providing information, overseeing the actual murder of our people. And that is something that we want to definitely keep in mind as we move forward into these uncertain days when a second coup attempt is very possible. And I think, we would definitely support KJ's argument in terms of understanding, that there had to have been some level of coordination between Washington and Seoul leading into this. And ultimately, what that leads us to really raise up in this moment is the need for US out of Korea. We really do need a South Korea, a Korean peninsula really, that can be truly independent and sovereign. And you can't be those things if you have 62 foreign military bases in your country, if you have a foreign military that oversees your own. And I think we have seen all of that unfold here in this moment of this coup attempt, because who was Yoon ultimately depending on to back him up politically and militarily? We know now that in terms of the internal organization that he should have been doing in his own party and the military from the standpoint of trying to lead a successful coup, a lot of the I's were not dotted, a lot of the T's were not crossed. That is to say, a lot of those essential details were not being met. And so what that implies is that very likely he was counting on support from the United States in order to legitimate what he was doing. It certainly wasn't going to come from within the society, right? We had something like a 19% approval rating before the coup, 13% now, as of the most recent polling that I've seen. So we feel that there is an urgent need to move this discussion to a focus on imperialism, not only for the danger that's presented, but also because we know that South Korea has been caught in this pattern before. We like to say we're very good at overthrowing right-wing leaders, and we are. It's absolutely true, and it is something that we should be proud of. At the same time, if we look back in our history, what has resulted from overthrowing these leaders without a revolutionary transformation of society and this underlying economic system? We have ousted Lee Seung-man, and then a couple years later, who did we get? We got Park Chung-hee. When we ousted Chun Doo-hwan, who came immediately afterward, it was Roh Tae-woo. When we ousted Park Geun-hye, what did that lead to eventually? It led to Yoon Suk-yeol. So we need to understand that these are the contradictions also inherent within South Korean society that are playing out, and that a victory in this one sense of being able to stop a coup and hopefully defeat it for good does not necessarily mean that the threat has gone away, because there is an underlying issue at work in that the People's Powers Party and the forces of the right do represent the most backwards element of the ruling class in South Korean society. And that is the element that depends entirely on the United States for its base of support. So we need to sever those links if we want to have the possibility of a real project in South Korea that can be based in popular sovereignty and the interests of the masses of people, rather than a tiny ruling clique at in the elite circles. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julian. That was such a powerful and it was a very informative presentation. And I think with both KJ's and Julian's presentation, I think we have very clear and powerful case regarding the role of United States in the making and empowering of the new dictator, Insa-윤석열. And also what also shows the weaknesses and all those problems in that. Now, we do have probably we can have like maybe about 10 minutes of a Q&A. And so those of you who have questions, you can write in the chat box, or you can also simply raise your hands, and we'll try to answer as many, address as many questions as we can. So while you are maybe thinking of the question, let me just add some facts about the impeachment process itself, because you guys might be wondering about what's going to be the next step and what we can do. So right now, the impeachment vote will take place either today, probably today, and you need about 200 members of the National Assembly. So once if they pass impeachment vote is passed, now they will go to the 9 judges of the Constitutional Court. In other words, that there will be the impeachment vote itself is not the final step. So that's where they're going to decide the constitution. The Constitutional Court is going to decide the impeachment. So as you recall, when Park Geun-hye was impeached, you remember the impeachment vote was successful, and then it went to the Constitutional Court, and finally it was ratified. So that is a process. So at this point right now, all the opposition, we need about, as I pointed out in the beginning, we need about the 8 votes from the ruling party. But the news that I'm hearing is that they are still remain united. And this is why it is such a tense, uncertain moment. And as we pointed out, it was without those very fast intervention, we probably would have been, South Korea would have been right now under martial law. And so that's why we wanted to have this urgent meeting. And especially it's important to have raised voice from the United States, because as you know, South Korea has been under, it's almost a quasi martial laws that a state, for instance, which country has 250 days of US-led war game? Which country has, received 21 instances a year from the strategic assets, nuclear powered assets from the United States? So what do you call, how do you call that? And so, this is, South Korea has been under siege, and this is just the latest outcome now. So that is where we need to, those of us in the United States should be able to raise our voice, and we can empower those who are fighting, struggling in South Korea. So let's, are there questions? I can see that KJ's comments is, I can see some KJ's comment in the chat room. Any questions? If you have any questions, just to raise your hand, I will unmute and then have you ask directly to the speaker or myself, and or any other comments that you want to make. Or if we don't have, let me have maybe both speakers, KJ and Julian, either question or comment, any thoughts regarding the current crisis, and anything that you would like to add. Let's go to KJ first, and then we'll have Julian have more comment or question.
Well, I wanted to respond to Jelly's comment in the chat, and she asked, if I'm not mistaken, did the US not know, given what happened under Carter? And, just to go back over the history, what happened under Carter? was the Gwangju massacre. Remember, under the Carter administration, the Shah of Iran had fallen, and when South Korea looked like it was going to have a similar situation, essentially the US ruling class said, we cannot have a second Iran in Korea. We will let the South Korean military do whatever it wants to. And they essentially greenlighted the massacre in Gwangju. In fact, not only did they greenlight it, but they brought in the aircraft carrier USS Coral Sea onto the flank just to intimidate the the Gwangju citizens even further. Now, for many, many years, the US denied that it had any responsibility. The first thing that it said that it did not have OPCON over Special Warfare Forces troops. And that is technically true, but it's actually a legal fiction. As I pointed out, Special Warfare Forces are the most deeply integrated into US operations. They are like twins. And so when the US says, oh, there were special forces, they were not really our forces, we had no OPCON over them at the time, this is a legal fiction they maintain, because traditionally special ops forces are sent to North Korea to engage in assassination and mayhem. And the US needs that plausible deniability that this was just Koreans, acting up. So that's one point. And then, of course, they actually did give full consent to the Korean forces to do what they will. Now, the US claims that, they were haplessly enmeshed in Korean politics and that they released OPCON and therefore they're not responsible. That's a little bit like somebody who has a pit bull and they say, oh, I let go of the leash. It's no longer my responsibility. They knew exactly what they were doing. It was like letting a feral cat loose inside a bird cage. They knew exactly what was going to happen. And Tim Sharrock, who is unfortunately not with us today, did a lot of FOIA with actual documents, and it shows that there's US complicity backwards and forwards all over Gwangju. So what is their responsibility in this situation? I think they certainly knew about it for the reasons that I mentioned in my presentation. Simply, South Korea is a very, very crowded dance floor for the military. You cannot go anywhere without bumping into another division, and therefore you have to communicate what you're doing. Otherwise, you're going to get shot down or shot at. So clearly, they must have communicated it to the United States. Was the US fully in on the coup? Were they fully behind it? I think that if they had been part of the preparation, I think it would have gone over much, much more smoothly. And the other thing that they would have done is they would have controlled all the Western media and given it a very, very favorable spin. They would have done complete and total narrative management, which is what they always do when they have a color revolution or a friendly coup. So the fact that they didn't have narrative control tells me that they were not directly involved in the planning, but I think they were willing to tolerate it. I think they were aware of it, and they wanted to see where it went and how it would go, because they do not want to lose Yoon, because if Yoon falls, because of all he has done for the United States, and a more progressive administration comes in, all this work around JACUS, around trilateral alliance, around escalation to a war with China, around creating military supply chain, some of that could be weakened. And the US doesn't want that. There is such a forward momentum for war against China. And Korea is the most important force multiplication platform that they have, is that they want to keep things as they are. They want to keep things as stable as they are. And they want to institutionalize. That is, they want to carve this into granite so that it cannot be changed.
To add to such an informative comment, I have also read that Yoon refused to resign in part because of the ratification, the formalizing military alliance between South Korea, Japan, and United States next year. That's just some of the comment that I heard. In other words, the United States cannot afford to lose Yoon. But on the other hand, because Yoon, Yoon's policy is so unpopular, and the United States, I think that it's at this point could not fully support the coup, the martial law. And but that being said, though, as KJ pointed out, that it's just common sense that it is impossible for United States not to know in advance. So that is to me it's important point to think about it. Now, thank you so much, KJ, for that comment. Are there any questions that you participants have towards speakers or other? There's an expected time frame. There's a question about if there is an expected time frame for the formalization of JGUS. A formalization of a JGUS, what I'm hearing is that if Yoon has been successful, next year will be the formalization of JGUS. But there are a lot of, as you know, there are a lot of issues formalizing that, formalizing the trilateral military alliance between Japan, China, and Korea. So it will be, I would say, it will be very highly it will be difficult at this point, especially with what's going on with the Yoon. And but that was still their timeline. That's what I've heard. And it looks like there's other questions. Okay, there are other questions about the specific process. Now, before we as it looks like we are almost running out of time now, I'll just make one more add of comments from Koreans, what I'm hearing in Korea. This is about a scholar who's responding to those Koreans, not only in Korea, but also in the United States, who very really right now worried about the impeachment, the failure of impeachment. And this is what he said. He says that there are people who worried about the impeachment quorum, and yes, but he says no worries. I'm translating Korean from English, so please understand. And he said that political groups who do not follow the will of people will be swept away. And he said the Constitutional Court will also reflect the will of people as summarized in the Constitution and laws. And he says in Korean, he says, the people must express themselves in various ways. Whatever means that you have, we have to do it now. And sometimes it gives those people in power give impression that it's never going to succeed. But we can't afford that. It says sovereign people should give orders. They should those people in power should look at the people, reflect on their mistakes, to figure out how they affect people. And as said, and he says that the president Yoon-suk-yeol is a criminal. And he has lost his sense of judgment, ability to govern, and the fate of a country is also that a lot of people around Yoon-suk-yeol have lost the faith, and he said that the impeachment is clearly, obviously justified, and people, even if it fails this time, we shouldn't give up, and we should fight. And if it's not tomorrow, it's going to be, there's going to be another time. So the will of people will win, and people will win. And there's no other power. It is the power comes from the people. And to that, let me add the chair of Opposition Party, Lee Jae-myung, who led this amazing, heroic, exhibit leadership in this struggle. And he said while he was live streaming during that intense moment, while climbing over the fence of National Assembly and calling 10,000, 20,000 people to please come to the National Assembly. And this is what he said. He said, to the soldiers, he said, you guys have the guns and bayonet, right? But we have a power given from people. People have power. Power comes from the people. So I think that's still the inspiring statement, and that from our leaders in Korea. So in that sense, we have hope. I think we're going to win this fight, and that's why what we have today is, I feel that it is extremely important. And I thank you so much for all your support and also time. Any last question, or otherwise we will say goodbye, and we'll meet next time.
Simone, I have a quick comment. I think it's important for us to understand that this is not going to be an easy battle. It's not going to be a single battle. This is just the first act. It's the prologue of what is going to be actually a very, very protracted struggle. So I think we need to take that into consideration. Traditionally, when we have had dictators, they usually end in one of three ways. They end in impeachment, they end in resignation like Lee Seung-man, or they end in assassination like Park Chung-hee. But even there, that is not the end. That is simply, the starting point of yet another historical cycle. So I think we need to be very, very aware, prepare ourselves for a long struggle. And in order to do a long struggle, you need to work with other people. As the proverb says, if you want to walk fast, walk alone. If you want to walk far, walk together. You need to find, if you don't already have a group that you're working with, find somebody with whom you can hold hands, lock arms, and walk together. Because I assure you, this is going to be a long, protracted struggle. And for those of us who lived through the martial law era, there's a sense of déjà vu. It's Groundhog Day for us. We're back in 1979. And so we understand that this is a struggle that has to be waged over the long durée, and that even when we feel like we're not making progress, we still have to move forward and work together.
Wise words, indeed. In fact, Kathy and I were talking about, you remember the time the martial law was declared, I was just high school student, he was, middle school student, and here we go all these years, and our hair is going gray, and we are back again, exactly to where we were, a student. So, but I think that as KJ said, and all of you, I think this is gonna be a long struggle, but we're empowered. We're gonna fight, and we're gonna win. And with that note, thank you so much, KJ and Julian, and all of you who on such a short notice. And obviously, we prepared only for a day or two, and it has been an amazing forum. And thank you so much. And